Hi, welcome everyone. Who here has heard of Google Cloud Identity as a product? Okay, that's good, that's good. We silently launched a product in March that's a standalone product that you don't have to be a G Suite customer, you don't have to be a GCP customer, and you can sign up for the product. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's not the focus of the talk today. So I'm going to be walking through cloud application and actually user lifecycle management directory as a part of that. My name is Scott Kriz. I'm a product manager at Google for cloud identity. I'm a fairly recent addition to Google. About 9 months ago, my company called Bidium was acquired, and Bidium was a cloud identity access management system. So a lot of what I think about, I'm presenting in the deck, while Google tends not to publicly share roadmaps, and 9 months ago I was on the other side of that equation as well, so I understand how that works. I think looking at how we think about cloud identity as a product is a pretty good view on things to come. So expectations have changed. Our workers are now mobile, they're web-based. Applications now are adopted by anybody in an organization. There's multiple ways that they're brought in, but that's actually a good thing. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's a good thing. So if you go to any of the Google talks today, you're going to see this slide probably on every one of them. It's the way that we work at Google. We view the perimeter as disappeared, so there's no longer this concept of VPN, hard to get into the castle, and then you can go places. Data is in SaaS applications. It might be in some on-prem applications, but the perimeter has disappeared, and we have to look at the use cases for not only our employees, but the vendors, the partners, and even the customers, and how they're getting into the applications. So users are accessing hundreds of applications. When we look at a typical company, I can say that it's very typical for an organization with even a few thousand employees to have the average employee have access to over 100 applications. So how did that happen? There's a number of ways that happens, and we'll talk about them soon. And so when employees have access to these hundreds of applications, and they either leave or transition within the company, how do you know what they had access to, and how does that impact what you do with that access or with the data that they had access to? I'm actually going to be talking later this afternoon at another talk relating a lot more to this issue, specifically around how Google is being leveraged by Netflix. I think it's a very good representation of a company that is cloud forward and cloud first, that has figured out really progressive ways to deal with cloud and identity access management. So the more apps that we have, the more they need to be managed, right? User lifecycle is more complex than it's ever been before. And specifically, and we'll talk a little bit more about why it's complex and what the implications are. But first, let's look at how do these applications find their way into organizations. And I know that, for example, at Google, we are a Workday customer. That's an application that when you walk in the door, you have access to as an employee. You didn't do anything to cause that. So this is what we would really consider top-down distribution. This used to be, before the cloud was around, pretty much the only way that applications got adopted. So these tend to be like Workday, SAP. There's many, many others, but these are the ones that are familiar to Google because we actually use them and we have permission to use their logos on a slide deck. Departmental, so we're seeing a lot more of this, and this is where I say this is a good thing. So some of the best of class tools that might not have the footprint or just gaining visibility are starting to effectively sell into departments. So it might be like Asana selling into the product management organization at a company, and they just start using the software. We don't think that's a bad thing, but we do think that it needs to be managed appropriately for a lot of different reasons having to do with security and compliance. Salesforce is probably one that's in the middle. In a lot of cases, it appears as a top-down, but at some point in companies, it generally gets delivered as a CRM for a department adoption case. And then we have these, what a lot of administrators would consider some of the initially painful applications to figure out. The applications that just bubble up and show up, and we don't know how they got there and who brought them into the organization. We call these Emergent Adoption, so, and we see a lot more of it. We see it not only in the Google App Marketplace, but we just see it across all of our customer base. And so figuring out how do we manage this sensibly without risking data leaving the company, without risking access to these applications that shouldn't occur. So however they're adopted, they need to be managed. We need to start thinking about how we onboard applications, no matter what the origin of adoption was. How we control access to not only applications, but different roles in the applications, bound to things like organizational units in a directory, groups or dynamic groups. Provisioning becomes increasingly important. And provisioning applications is complicated, but it's nowhere near as complicated as deprovisioning. When you think about deprovisioning an application, one of the things that comes to mind is how, as an organization, if you might be a G Suite user, when you offboard a user, what happens to their data? Do you transfer it to somebody? Do you completely delete it? What do you do with the emails? These are all complicated decisions that need to happen. And so how does a product enable you to do that without having manual processes and custom-built workflows? And then retiring an application. So maybe you decide that you're using the best of breed CRM today, but something better comes up. How do you actually retire an application effectively? And I think we've come a long way here as an industry with retiring applications with GDPR and understanding how we can actually just remove data and wipe data. But you might not want to only do that. You might actually want to transfer that data to the new product. So these are the things we think about when we think about how to retire an application. And then supporting of standards. So Google has always been a company that really emphasizes and is at the front lines when it comes to standard adoption and creation. So I think most people here are probably familiar with SAML, OIDC, SCIM. There's a lot more standards coming out, and there's a lot more work being done between what would be considered technically competitors to try to really push standards, because it's better for everybody if we start to push on standards as much as possible. So optimizing the way that companies actually use applications. Who can get access to an application? Who can grant access to an application? How do roles and permission mapping occur? Do you want to allow users to self-subscribe to applications? And if you do, how do you want them to do that? And do you want them to be able to do that with any application? How do you analyze as an administrator, as an IT department, if somebody's adopting an application that has sensitive data to it? And how do you ensure that that has, for example, is GDPR compliant? These are important things that our customers think about and that we think about. How do you monitor app usage? So what if you bought 20 Salesforce accounts or 200 Salesforce accounts, but you have a rogue team of sales that just won't use that product? That's not a great thing. So how do you get visibility into that and take action on it? And then how do you create an approval flow for self-registration of applications? So who wanted the access? Who granted the access? How was that done? And how did you track that? And these things start to get really important when you're looking at identity governance and things that lie beyond, effectively, application lifecycle management. So the employee lifecycle, and this is not actually linear, these are just three things. Hiring a user, hiring an employee, a contractor, a vendor. Where do they get added? Do they get added into SAP? Do they get added into Workday? Is the origin Active Directory? How do those things play together? How do you populate these users into different applications with the right roles and attributes? An employee leaves. What happens? We talked a little about the use case on a per application basis. And as employees transition to other roles, Google has a lot of experience with this, and I think a lot of opportunities lie in employee transition. From an organizational perspective, it's actually fairly straightforward to have an employee join an organization, change a role, change the management, but what does that mean for access to applications? Do the permissions on a specific application get expanded or reduced based on that transition? Or do they lose it altogether? So these are the things we think about. In large colleges and universities, it actually gets more complex when you think about how does a user go from a student to an alumni to potentially a professor or a contractor. So what does that entire life cycle of that user look like? And so as we think about this, and I'm not here to pitch our product, but I do want to say what we're working on today and what Google has available. So like I said, we've now introduced, as of March, a cloud identity product that is standalone. We do handle device management. We just had a session on that. We manage more Android devices, I think, than than all other companies in aggregate, which isn't a surprise, but we also have a very strong presence there in iOS. Millions of accounts are already being used in Google's cloud identity product. We've leveraged, when you look at the user side, and these are the 4 pillars we think about: users, devices, directories, and apps. When you start thinking about the user side, we have enormous experience with billions of accounts from the consumer side and how we can protect those accounts from phishing attacks, what the implication is, and how that translates into enterprise and the specific administrator's ability to take action and be notified when things happen. From the directory side, we have customers that are using Active Directory that sync with cloud identity, and that then provisions users into applications. So that entire cycle, it's possible if they're using Active Directory and they're using Office 365. From a purist Google perspective, we want our customers to be using the best products that work for them. So this is really a big deal for us to separate out this product and to say that, sure, we think that we have a great productivity suite, we think that we build great products, but if you as an organization feel like you want to augment some of our offerings or go entirely with other vendors, we want to be there for you. So that also includes with HRIS systems or HRMS systems. So these are, for example, SAP. We have customers that are pushing user data directly into Cloud Directory, which is part of Cloud Identity in SAP, and the workflow goes from there. On the application side, so we do handle single sign-on for SAML-based authentication, OIDC, which is something that Google's been really pushing for a long period of time, and also provisioning of applications. We have Skim up there. The reality in the industry right now is that most applications are actually using custom APIs. We would love for standards to be adopted, and we're pushing on it, but that's where we are with that today. So these are the pillars of what we have in today's offering. You can actually sign up for a free trial too. So if you go to cloud.google.com/identity, that's where you can learn more information about the offering, see the applications that we integrate with and the directories that we work with. And I think I'll end it there and open it up for questions, but I do want to reiterate that a lot of the things that I say that we're thinking about, while we don't share our public roadmap, but we do announce things, and the next one will be at Next. That gives you an idea of how we think of the world. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'd like to open it up for questions. Any questions? Yes? Is cloud identity separate from the G Suite? Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's been a little bit of market confusion about that. So it might be important to think about the history of where cloud identity came from. So G Suite is a suite of applications, and it's collaborative, and it's Gmail. And customers a few years ago started to ask, can we leverage Google as a way to log into other applications? And so Google started to build out connectors for SAML connectors into applications, acting as an identity provider. In the last year, we decided as a company that it was strategic to pull that out of the G Suite and have it be a standalone offering. So Google Cloud Identity is now an entirely separate offering, is technically part of G Suite, but you don't have to be a G Suite customer in order to use Cloud Identity. So you can get Cloud Identity, you can use it with G Suite, you can use it with any set of applications. You can sync it with Active Directory or choose to use Google Authentication. It's a very flexible product built to accommodate for the use cases that we hear most often from our customers. Any other questions? Yes?
What are you using Skim for today?
So Skim can be used for a number of different things. We're using it for provisioning and deprovisioning into applications directly from Cloud Directory. So you can think of, based on a directory's mapping into Cloud Identity, handling the provisioning or deprovisioning on a per organizational unit basis. But we think about a lot of things when we think about Skim and how else it can be used for the larger ecosystem without sharing anything more than that. Are we still using GADS? So we're in an evolution right now, and so yes, there are customers still using GADS, and there's also something called GCDS, which is Google Cloud Directory Sync. They're slightly different versions. I would say that probably not something that we're publicly sharing right now, but we've definitely put a lot more thought and attention into a very clean way for Active Directory to sync with Cloud Directory. And so, yes, customers using GADS, also using GCDS, and that's not a product that we are putting on the side and continuing to build other things. We're still putting attention into that product.
Are you going to be allowing the scheme line to connect to you?
So you're talking about custom schema?
No. Can we push to the Cloud Directory using Skim?
Today, you cannot push to the Cloud Directory using Skim. I cannot confirm or deny whether or not that will be something that will be available in the short run. It's a very good question, though, yes.
So is this a paid offering from Google?
There is a paid product if it is a standalone product. There's also a free version, and so the features of the paid versus the free are very easy to look up if you go to cloud.google.com/identity. The free offering is a great one. The paid offering today, it's a $6 a month per user. I think right now, as we're getting it out and rolling it out, it's discounted to $4 per user per month. So it is a separate product, but it is available in the background as the free version to all G Suite customers, if that clarifies it.
Is there a phone number I can call when my Skim provisioning is not working?
Is there a phone number you can call? We do have support. Are you talking about Skim provisioning into Cloud Direct? Outbound.
So say I want to provision Workplace with Skim.
Yep.
And it's not working. Is there a number I can call based on that $4 a month subscription to get support for that?
That's a good question. Do you guys know? Yes, there is a support number you can call. However, I will say that Skim is pretty robust, and I actually am the PM responsible for the connectors, so that has anything to do with inbound or outbound, so that's all of the Skim. Once it's been tested and we've worked with the service provider to test the Skim connection, it's highly unlikely that there's something that goes on. It would either be related to a flaw in the initial integration that needs to be fixed, so it's an actual bug, but we really don't see that very often. Or it can also be some of the service providers do things like go into maintenance mode, so obviously something that we're aware of and we log in the reports, but not something that we can really do too much about. I think for Google, it's a little bit foreign to say we're going to be in maintenance mode for the next 3 hours. We just don't have that kind of concept. But for a lot of the original SaaS providers, that does happen, yeah.
That was more a question about your support model.
Oh, so yes, we have a dedicated phone, we have email, we have documentation. We obviously try to make the documentation as best class documentation, but This is an enterprise offering. I think the expectations of enterprise is that you can talk to a human being to resolve an issue. And so, yeah, we're aligned with that. Great questions, yes?
For the user subscription fee, is that per user that you provision and deprovision, or is that per user that's using the tool, the service?
So it's for any user that exists inside of the cloud directory in Google's cloud directory. So does that answer the question? Okay. Yeah. Now there are things you can do on the Active Directory syncing side and using the admin SDK to create filters and things like that. So if you have users that aren't real, they don't have to find their way into a paid offering. Yeah.
Provisioning adapter to apps, do the apps have to be in an app store, or can it be like SaaS apps like internet delivery?
Yeah, so most of the ones that we integrate right now are examples would be things like Salesforce. So we do have a list of applications that we have specifically identified as validated that we handle provisioning to. We also have the ability to add a custom application, so that you can use things like single sign-on and provisioning for homegrown applications as well. So a number of customers have internal applications they've built, and if they support that standard, then they will just be part of the system.
And then is it all of the users that made it into the cloud directory get synced into the responsive applications, let's say Salesforce, or do you have filtering, and how robust?
Yeah, so that's based on organizational unit. So you can decide which OU will gain access to which applications.
Okay, so it's just on the OU level.
It's currently just on the OU level. But again, I cannot confirm or deny that that will be a more robust offering going forward. Okay, great. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about scenarios for when the user leaves the org and how to manage that data or delete that data or whatnot.
Yep.
Is that a user configurable workflow, or do you have like set options that each one of your service providers allow, or like
Yeah.
how configurable is that action for me as the customer?
Yeah, so I want to make sure I differentiate between Google's offering and what is needed in the industry and how we see the industry. Today, there are not robust offerings across applications from any cloud identity access management provider. There are ones that will turn the application access on and off, and there are ones that will destroy the account. But when we think about that, we don't think as Google that that is a good enough solution. So
So right now, in the cloud directory offering, you don't necessarily offer
we do not. We do not offer that option.
unless it's Gmail, which I think is great.
So we like to think of G Suite as our friends, but as another application. And yes, I do think that the G Suite has done a really good job at figuring out, because of the data specifically that exists inside of G Suite, of what to do with that data. And I think if you are around for the afternoon, Netflix will be talking about how they deal with that specific issue, leveraging cloud identity and other solutions. Great, well, thank you so much for joining. Again, I hope I didn't plug it too many times, but 3:45, we're going to be going into a lot more depth about the advantages that Google has in cloud identity, and we'll be speaking with Netflix, so it's actually probably always best to hear from a customer and see how they're leveraging what we've built in cloud identity. But thank you for joining.